If you've always wanted to try wood burning but have had no idea where to start, then this video is specifically for you, because I also had no idea where to start. But I was able to take a blank piece of wood and turn it into a successful wood burning piece on my very first try. What's up? My name is Jason. I run my YouTube channel Fish and Grain Designs, and I'm an aspiring fish artist. And in today's video, I'm going to show you guys my top 5 tips for beginner wood burners that I discovered while making my first ever wood burning piece. If you guys stick around to the end, I will give you my #1 technique that makes it almost impossible for you guys to mess up while working. Let's get straight into the video. Tip number 1 is to be aware of the grain of the wood when you're burning. Different types of wood are going to have different grain structure to them, which will pose different challenges depending on the direction in which you're going to be working. Take a look at this practice square right here. If you take a close look, you can see the grain of the wood is running in this direction. Watch what happens when I work with the grain. I'm very easily able to get a nice, smooth, consistent stroke. Now watch what happens when I work perpendicular to the grain. Notice I get these patches that are a bit darker and some that are a little bit lighter. This is happening because the tool has to work harder to burn through individual sections of grain, which requires a bit longer time of the wood burning tool contacting the wood and more pressure causing a darker mark. You're going to be able to tell this is happening, obviously, just through the visual look of the wood. Parts will look darker, some parts will look lighter, but you're also actually going to be able to feel it happening. It'll feel kind of like your tool is catching a bit on the wood and then pushing through and breaking free. If you feel this, try rotating your piece slightly to work from a different angle, or just work on pressing very lightly to avoid digging into the wood too much. Tip 2 is speed and pressure matter. I mentioned this a little bit in the last tip when I talked about using a lighter pressure while you're working. The other thing you have to factor in is how quickly you're actually moving your tool over the wood. This skill is entirely built just through practice and actually learning how achieving varying levels of tone feels. This is why I highly recommend having a practice square or maybe a spare piece of wood to just mess around with while you're working if you're unsure how to achieve the effect you're looking for. A quick rule of thumb is the lighter you press and the faster you move your tool, the less burn you're going to get on your piece of wood. And obviously the harder you press and the slower you move, the more burn you're going to achieve. If you press hard but move quickly, or press lightly but move very slowly, you're going to get different effects. You're going to get maybe a lighter value even though you're pressing harder, or you're going to get a darker value even though you're pressing a little bit lighter. But my tip for when you're starting out is to err on the side of always pressing lighter and just moving your tool a bit faster. This way you're always going to be burning your wood less, so you can go back in and darken it up later if that's what you need to do. Tip number 3 is to work from light to dark. Again, I mentioned this a little bit at the end of the last tip, but it's absolutely essential that you work from light to dark. One thing that makes wood burning fun, but actually also a bit nerve-wracking, is it's a pretty high stakes way to work. It's nearly impossible to fix an area where you have gone too dark on the piece. It's very easy to make an area that's too light darker though. That's why it's so important to make sure you're not jumping to the darkest values right from the beginning, unless you're absolutely certain that you want that dark value to go in that specific spot. For me, when I was working on this fish, I did a super light burn across the body, and then I went back over it a second time and darkened everything up to its correct value. It takes a little bit longer, but this kept me from making areas, especially along the midsection, too dark, and it allowed me to just build up to the correct value that I was looking for across the fish. Tip number 4 is to use different wire burning nibs for different sections of your piece. If you guys do not have more than one cutting wire, before you do anything else, go ahead and order yourself a variety of different wire nibs. In the beginning, I tried using this detail attachment to do pretty much the entire fish. It worked relatively well for me in the head since it was pretty tight and required a lot of precision burning. But the second I got to the body, I very quickly realized that this was not going to work. Different burn nibs are built for different uses. The detail nib, which is what I was using, was built for precise burning. It's super sharp and it scores the wood quite deeply in a very focused area. This is great for sections where you need detail, but in areas like the body where I needed to cover large sections in a very consistent tone, this nib is actually almost impossible to use. The shader nib that I used, however, worked perfectly for this. It's a very circular, flat nib that covers a large area at once, and the flat surface allows me to not cut deeply into the wood, but rather slide over the top of it, which is super helpful for getting a consistent tone. Again, having a practice square or a spare piece of wood to try out different nibs is very useful because you'll be able to see how much each nib interacts with the wood. But again, don't force the nib to do something it's not meant to do. You're just gonna make your chances of messing up way higher and your job way harder. All right, guys, as promised, we are on the final tip that will make it almost impossible for you guys to mess up if you implement this correctly. And thankfully for beginners, I personally think this is the easiest tip to implement out of any of the ones that I've said previously. The final tip is to make sure you're setting the temperature of your wood burning tool correctly. Now, this may sound super obvious, but let me tell you, as someone who just started, I had a ton of questions at the beginning on what temperature to set my tool at, how do I know when I have the correct temperature, and should I adjust it when I'm burning? The best tip that I have is to always set your temperature low. As mentioned before, getting the hang of speed, pressure, using different nibs, it all just introduces a higher margin of error when you're just starting out. You haven't quite developed the skill and feel of working with the tool. The best way to combat that, in my opinion, is to work at a low temperature. Even if you accidentally maybe press too hard, move too slow, use the wrong nib, the low temperature will keep your tool from ever burning too much into the wood. Now, what do I mean by low temperature? For me, the lowest temperature that I worked at was around 280 to 300 degrees Fahrenheit, or around 138 to 150 degrees Celsius. I found this was the range where I was able to see evidence of burning occurring, but it never was to the point where it was building up too quickly or was uncontrollable. Now, did I work at this temperature for the whole piece? Definitely not. The rate of the burn at this temperature is incredibly slow, so I would have been working on this piece for an insanely long time. I was eventually able to get the hang of using the tool, and I bumped the temperature up higher, generally in a range of 330 to 400 degrees Fahrenheit or 165 to 204 degrees Celsius. But in the beginning, when you're still figuring everything out, I recommend working around the first temperature range that I mentioned. If you're super nervous about messing up, I would actually maybe even consider going a bit lower in temperature. The most important thing is that this will always help you never burn sections more than you're trying to, and will allow you to save a mess up a lot easier. These are the tips and techniques that I found help me have the most control and most success as a beginner wood burner. If you guys enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please consider liking, subscribing, and leave a comment telling me which tip you found to be most helpful in your journey as a beginner wood burner. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.